the term called mass intelligence gathering exercise. It has been a mass intelligence gathering exercise, deeply instituted in the fabricated way of life of certain national types in this world. No clearer than that very mass intelligence gathering exercise of fellow victims or people caught in the cross-contamination of national affairs. And just to triple check, I'm going to show everybody that it is not available on my own list. I'll go back to where the actual video itself from my end was uploaded, but not available in my country, as if like
and Greg Hunt squashed an investigation of the Bureau of Meteorology earlier this year.
Okay, all right, Greg Hunt. So can I just check you one thing? NASA. Now NASA,
yes.
The people that landed men on the moon.
I don't
I should just ask, actually, you believe we landed men on the moon? But,
see the little trick there?
YouTube. And the reason was because it had Michael Jackson's journey from Motown.
It's questioning whether or not I believe that I'm a moon skeptic. Now,
are you?
Which isn't any.
No, I'm not.
Isn't claimed by any specific company at all. Well, it says,
I mean, it's a serious accusation. The idea that NASA.
But that's what they say. The reason is, but it's a subcommittee explanation that was handwritten on the spot.
That's Michael's hooks, it's sensitivity. That's what women be saying. Michael's just so sensitive.
Right at the end, like it supposedly relates. It doesn't relate.
The man who edited the great books of the Western world as a part of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he said, look, human nature has not changed. But that's where education goes off the track today. Most people, most scholars would disagree with that, I think, today. They think that, well, we are getting better and better. We're just gradually improving. And, of course, that's the underlying premise of evolution. We're getting better and better. But look around. Are we getting better and better? We're about to destroy all human flesh on this earth. Does that make sense that we're getting better? Well, there's been more bloodshed and will be more bloodshed in this last century of man than any other century on this earth. Now that's something we need to think about and realize that colleges don't understand human nature. Notice, let me just quickly read these verses. God lamented the fact that Israel did not have the heart to obey His commands, Deuteronomy 5 and verse 29, and that every man might know the plague of his own heart, 1 Kings 8 and verse 38. Man's heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, Jeremiah 17 and verse 9. And the carnal mind was naturally hostile to God, Romans 8 and verse 7. Now there it is. You see, but God says, look, I want you to yield yourself to me so you can live the happy, abundant life. That's what I want you to do. Well, that's what God is going to give you. And He said, beloved, I wish above all that you may prosper and be in health.
The term called mass intelligence gathering exercise. It has been a mass intelligence gathering exercise, deeply instituted in the fabricated way of life of certain national types in this world. No clearer than that very mass intelligence gathering exercise of fellow victims or people caught in the cross-contamination of national affairs, where, let's just say, you could highlight a word called continents, and like your senses, like the word nation, right? Just like tribunal, let alone tribe, or what it is to be a nation in the first place. What is continents? To say that you readily access and hear the intelligence, just like the gathering of information brought to the expense of people in which to act upon it. The mass intelligence gathering exercise, like M.I.G.E, is an enhanced dependency of non-for-profit economic covered defense strategies by corporate bond schemists inside the national intelligence agencies of the nation. Therefore, here in Australia, the intelligence gathering exercise is to uncover a concealed use of cultural interrogation tactics used by the Australian intelligence agency sectors in terms of licensed practices through corporate defence teal ledgers on Australian soil, virtually on itself. Like on itself amongst your own percentages, doing it to yourself, where it doesn't actually face the international community or the international population head on. It goes to steal the psychology like the auditory systems relay, the establishment, the moral agency in which to form character that tries to suit themselves readily accessible, available for those areas that you say. The interrogation expelling the use of transactional account keeping service justifies itself or warrants itself. Areas of interrogation that expel use of transactional account keeping services to protect the welfare and personal health of individuals amongst that class magnitude of the residential tax keeping records of, let's say, warranted Australian citizenship numbers. What it is to be a citizen for residential tax purposes found living an expelled use of transactional account upkeep and maintenance for no real divisional purposes, no real defence, teal ledge whatsoever. It was all opportunism at pace, right? What actually warrants a person to be found a citizen of any nation for residential tax purposes? Not to be found, or not to be found receiving their rightful entitlements, only to find that it's secretive, where the mass intelligence gathering exercise is to uncover that very cultural interrogation tactic used by the intelligence agency sectors. Say, conscription to the industrial sectors of practice management licenses and the reverse trending nature of Australian cohorts enlisted in such network protectionism and liabilities to be found pardoned is like having to find reasons why the transactional records for these residential tax purposes, right, be it the citizen account, whether excused as a directory propaganda or political activism gone sour at any stage, at all cost, is an unreservedly impertinent, grandiose scale. It's actually unreservedly impertinent, period. And to all available evidence, this startling discovery of nil transactional accounts of citizens lead to this unearthed and unmasked manifest of detriment held against fellow national citizens for many decades previous to where we're at now. Having no respect for people past, no present, therefore the future, the present future has to ask those questions. What is the mass intelligence gathering exercise only to be caught in it and then say for national defense or for national security? It's never for a nation. It's only ever for a few people behind closed doors, just like those attributes. A series of crony business ventures tied to impervious acts of flagrant political heresies. A cultural divide of incest and pedophilia attributed by a consistent bargaining rate of kleptomania and geriatrichood inside systems, file, rank, and disposition. So therefore this cultural interrogation tactic held at pace in a fomented criminal activity unwarranted, unearths and unmasks this manifest of detriment held against fellow national citizens. Why there is an expelled use of transactional account-keeping records for these citizens, only to be told it's for this or for that reason on a national scale, when it's only ever for a few people behind closed doors, but most importantly the individual, that very expert held in confidence by any national trust, or any corporate trust, any business venture. In shorter words to describe this, there is identity or industrial extortion happening, deprivation of liberty, and an embezzlement, racketeering, and credit union fraud by presiding member family ties, like that weight of merit, inside the National Defence Teal operations secretly pilfering their wage subsidies, well found to be the only source of operation conducted by national entity and inquiry. Just like every day you wake up, you don't give up your day job, you're trying nothing different. You're defrauding the counter-activity level of online application strength of national sovereign citizens, and those very sovereign citizens' informal recognition in accredited fieldworks to take place and privilege, like exclusivity, to an industrial-grade advancement inside file and rank, held more important by network authorities and managing directors than the worth of the personal well-being of graphic design experts, just enslavened by the limited access to investment paths, by any given transactional freedom whatsoever, which people should be able to see, not be held in secret trust or secret service or defense corporate strategy while they just count crumbs, whilst fraudulently placing personnel forging their advertising space, stolen identities, and moving on an incontrovertible world of marketing brand issue lifestyles in such lucrative forms of pardon and relieved duty, mind you, relieved of their duty, that the licensed distribution records of Australian intellectual property, lest it be national intellectual property, had and was being stacked simultaneously in sequence through federal registration and overseas duality. If you want to reflect an internal culture inside Australia's corporate defence relationships as one constantly on the hunt and grooming prowl to infiltrate spinster movements on vulnerable men who specialise in graphic design expertise in any idea known to the open industrialised globe, where those innovation ideas provides that very utility, why they would secretly use their own citizens or percentages, those numbers, stupid all over themselves and found doing it to themselves. In that the living career account of any subsidised personnel working in key public sector relations directly exposes the enhanced use of espionage as an interrogation feature rather than the simple definition of perversion on citizens and breach of human rights via statistics analysis or the percentage gain bargaining numbers inside any jurisdict or municipality held against itself. If it was an Australian corporate media firm exposing their defence ties to state asset grabs and the frequent convening of stolen intellectual property amongst its own sovereign citizens, that in fact incestuously perceives to be fellow corporate sponsors of an invitation to frequent and convene vulnerable citizens rather than to identify serious federal and international crimes committed through defence resources and legislated by annexure attachments to bypass policing laws, powers, and indicate at any cost by Confederate bonds, those influences, right? These are corporate standoff tactics reflecting and ensuring the nature of culpable activity unearthed from within. These landscape development issues in Australia through the departmental sectors surrounding the landscape of strategic economic development plans in many certain council municipalities here in Australia, state governments, and everybody supposedly tied in and held accountable. State governments like Brisbane City, Ipswich City, Logan City, and Southwest Burnett regions, the very federal member seat of Griffith, the federal seat of Denison, and the federal seat of Blair. Largely subsidised by federal and state finance grants in some marginal areas of all operations under blanket systems investment, as high as 73% of all the departmental funding pumping fundamentalists secretly interrogating their own citizens through crony practice managements, through agencies and departments, and industry, all funded and protected by defence and legislation, providing congressional grants by state and federal governments to these practice managements, all filtering through departments, so poorly exercising an approval to operate that the personal careers and civil liabilities of national citizens, sovereign citizens, were in very real proof cases being criminally forged to compensate the itinerant shortfall of those licensed practice managements who simply should have been stripped of their service rights and funding privileges. They've been pilfering their personal concessions and wage subsidies, and this meant isolated incidents of even after-hours espionage, after-hours rape and extortion to desperately procure the detrimental effect of protecting the undergraduate class yearbook of defence personnel exempt from record or inquest to show allocation of those benefits and marginal seat fundings in these areas previously mentioned as an industrial green light in which to retrieve grade market share intellectual property and pre-approved fundamental practices and management scheme operations, which the confederacies inside the state and church must approve and cover their ass, in which to target vulnerable individuals and to look at individuals as a fucking invitation, as if people don't perv, as if there's no impervious act of flagrant political heresies going on. When people look at a naked person as a fucking invitation for sex, and yet when it comes to things like the world in print, like intellectual property ideas, you say yous are so short of a conversation that you must. Mate, you're the epitome of state-sponsored corruption. Incest becomes mind-staggeringly obvious. And this is what it is to identify state asset grabs, and what it is to identify those very personnel that were fed through the defence cause only to go on to be a media celebrity or a lousy journalist or a reporter, which they'll claim they are, but they're not really. It's a conniving spendthrift operation. You're constantly dealing with that classic age-old political pub test evaluation, and they become a arse-sniffing, scab-labouring gold digger, and that very cultural interrogation tactic used by national intelligence agency sectors, right? Use this just like the middle gatekeepers or the middle grounds in which to never inform the rich, the poor, or the 24/7 emergency service personnel around the clock to do anything in which to solve the situation of individual sovereignty, just like the individual account through transactions. Nations like Australia, lest it be so many nations around the world, you are operating under a blanket system that expels the use of transactional account keeping services to protect the welfare and personal health and safety and maintenance and upkeep of individuals held in confidence by your operations amongst those class magnitudes. It isn't war. It doesn't matter what your earthly circumstance is born into this world, this 21st century. It's actually called a dependency. So whether you like to admit it or not, the psychology of life, even in this warring environment, has to change. It's not war. It's actually a dependency. Fancy if by the numbers inside defense operations, defense hubs, intelligence hubs, you people were found by the numbers frequenting and desperating and convening individuals with zero dependence, with no alibis and excuse, whatsoever, just to be able to continue to maintain and upkeep, and yet only to forever go on with a name blanked out and Freedom of Information release documents, as if you don't exist, to hide behind the pressable fact that there is some humanitarian dividend at stake. To be an Australian is a residence for tax purposes. So what is it to understand the ideology behind secret services before, during and after, if it means you can't fight? Now what is it to say you can't fight in opposed to you can't translate, like those graphic design experts or people held in confidence, just like conscripted numbers for any corporation, conscripted numbers for any business, conscripted numbers for any close-shouldered confidence. We go to count on yous and you can't be counted. We go to count on yous and then in a second surprise, yous are counting really fucking hard. So therefore you got to provide more provisions for them whilst they have the authority supposedly. You got to provide them time, just like provisions, and all the time goes by and it's not enough for them to be able to operate or function and to solve cases from their end. You say that, oh, it's war, it's defense. No, it's not. If it was, then why haven't you finished? Why are you unsuccessful? Why are you not picking up the bill from your end? And why have you not solved people's lives? If you said you can fight, I think you just want the person standing alongside you to fight and not the person in front of you. That's what it is to recognise cowards. In Australia, where it's the coward punch, or it's the rape, or it's the after hours thing. It's the extortion, it's the cold-shouldered theft, and the cheeky, stingy Nazi nigger that goes with it. And the culture that you'll say in psychiatric terms is a mental predisposition, or a psychiatric predisposition, a genetic predisposition, but fancy if it was actually engineered and modified that way, where it's always, getting your precious daughter or son off a criminal charge by using solicitation and people influence to such an effect, but never the attributes of fighting and sacrificing. That your own adults now grown up just like your own families, that internal culture says that you're scared of life and you're scared of prison. You're scared of adults. You're scared of consequence. You actually may not know how to formulate consequence. Like a club owner needs security to hide behind. You people want the person standing next to you alongside you to fight for you and not the person in front of you. Just like the so-called client, just like the so-called battle, and just like the so-called concentration that sees you point fingers but then tell the person next to you all about it. It's like a distraction, isn't it? It's a distraction to understand how you have unwarranted interrogation tactics at the helm of certain cultural divide, given the licenses and the green lights to continue to operate, forever being a low-budget gimmick and surviving on departmental concession or departmental protection is not good enough to allow anymore. If you aren't finished, you're unsuccessful. If you're not finished, you're unsuccessful. You're not even fucking worth retirement. You're not worth confidence. Go look back and use a calculator, but go look back and look at every fucking thing you've done. You've invested nothing. You've done everything you can to ask the person next to you, but never the person in front of you. This is this age-old addiction factor today, where people so far distant from you are being brought so close to you, and the people that are close to you are being pushed so far away. It works in both areas, whether you're front and center or whether you're shoulder to shoulder. There's certain dimensions that go with it, and whether or not you're up for it or not. Your mouth formulates one of 5 senses. Fancy if your mouth was to override what your eyeballs were looking at, and you stole the shape, you stole the concentration the whole time. You had to wait to steal something before your mouth could commentate. You had to steal a shape or a figure before your mouth could operate, before you could even forge a conversation or an industrial markup or an after-hours revolutionary, anything, that you had to wait for it. You weren't even the mother or father that gave birth to it. And you claim that you're a reputable family. It might just be in nations like this one and others that you don't have the people power. You want the whole world to come together, but it doesn't work itself in your democracy. You just want to put 300 people in one nation and stand over it with one language. It doesn't work. It requires the whole world, not just putting them into a corner and throwing offense at them through stolen memoranda and stolen propaganda and stolen political activism and anything that might literally identify itself as impervious acts of flagrant political heresies. A cultural divide of incest and pedophilia attributed by a consistent bargaining rate of kleptomania and geriatrichood, as if you're not paying wages, you're not paying salaries, you're not raising people properly. If you haven't processed original national citizens by now, you have to ask, what's your motive? How can you possibly get it wrong? You haven't even gone out of your way as a family or a power to process individuals per day or per week, as if you have a job every day to correctly process people and to make damn well sure that you did process even one each day, to call yourself a reputable governing authority. Because authority stems from the word author. Fancy if you were thieving your administration, thieving your memoranda, thieving your stats, and found doing nothing with it. Just like this age-old classic argument of custodianship. It might just be that the cultural interrogation tactics used by certain national defense strategies has no power, has no goddamn strength or zest or quality. It just finds itself caught in the content, or let's say even the context.
Host can refer to an army of demons, angels, or men. God has an army of angels and saints. Satan has an army of demons and men, in this case, sinning saints. In other words, they're working through rebels within God's own church, if you can fathom that. God's people are at war. It's not easy obeying God. God never said that it would be. But the great wars that are going on around this earth are really invisible for the most part. They're hidden from this world. And yet how many Christians do you think, how many people, Christians in this world, do you think would say, well, I really believe that, or I would stake my life on that? And yet it's very much a part of the Bible, and God said it's not even for any time except this very end time that you and I are living in right now. Now the good news is that little remnant is going to win out, because that angelic army has a lot more power, and even though it's a small little group, it trusts God and prevails, as you always do if you trust God. Always. Whether it's an individual or a little group of God's people, I'm telling you, you can't lose if God is with you. That's the good news in all of this. But you see, if you do turn away from God, then there is a terrifying price that has to be paid, because here the demon army has actually defeated most of God's own people and turned them away from God. This great apostasy. 50% of them are going to have to go in the great tribulation and won't be protected by God and will repent there. And 50% are going to go in and will not repent and will lose their eternal lives. So you can see why this spiritual abomination is so much more important than any physical abomination could ever be. Notice verse 11. Yea, he magnified himself, this evil man who led the spiritual abomination that did so much destruction in God's church. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, that's Christ, And by him the daily or sacrifice or the work of God was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Where it says to the prince of the host, it should be against. It's against Christ. He's fighting against Christ and doing a lot of damage because of rebels within God's church who just surrender to the devil. And it's so bad that the work of God is stopped temporarily.
This is this age-old addiction factor today, where people so far distant from you are being brought so close to you, and the people that are close to you are being pushed so far away. It works in both areas, whether you're front and center or whether you're shoulder to shoulder. There's certain dimensions that go with it, and whether or not you're up for it or not. Your mouth formulates one of 5 senses. Fancy if your mouth was to override what your eyeballs were looking at, and you stole the shape, you stole the concentration the whole time. You had to wait to steal something before your mouth could commentate. You had to steal a shape or a figure before your mouth could operate, before you could even forge a conversation or an industrial markup or an after-hours revolutionary. Anything. That you had to wait for it. You weren't even the mother or father that gave birth to it. And you claim that you're a reputable family. It might just be in nations like this one and others that you don't have the people power. You want the whole world to come together, but it doesn't work itself in your democracy. You just want to put 300 people in one nation and stand over it with one language. It doesn't work. It requires the whole world, not just putting them into a corner and throw an offense at them through stolen memoranda and stolen propaganda and stolen political activism and anything that might literally identify itself as impervious acts of flagrant political heresies. A cultural divide of incest and pedophilia attributed by a consistent bargaining rate of kleptomania and geriatrichood, as if you're not paying wages, you're not paying salaries, you're not raising people properly. If you haven't processed original national citizens by now, you have to ask, what's your motive? How can you possibly get it wrong? You haven't even gone out of your way as a family or a power to process individuals per day or per week, as if you have a job every day to correctly process people and to make damn well sure that you did process even one each day, to call yourself a reputable governing authority. Because authority stems from the word author. Fancy if you were thieving your administration, thieving your memoranda, thieving your stats, and found doing nothing with it. Just like this age-old classic argument of custodianship. It might just be that the cultural interrogation tactics used by certain national defense strategies has no power, has no goddamn strength or zest or quality. It just finds itself caught in the content, or let's say even the context. You say, coherence is what a person says and does add up. What if yous were found what yous are saying and doing is not adding up, having stolen that very activity? That you are actually completely incoherent and you are scared of consequences, that you can't formulate shapes. If it wasn't on your goddamn counter, if it wasn't on your watch, then why the fuck are you speaking about over your eyeballs? It's the autism that draws upon your fingers and your eyeballs. If it was something else, it would be the very heartstrings. It would be the walking, talking 2 feet and a heartbeat. It would be the hand and eye coordination. You people are thieving remote guarantee. You people are thieving remote controls. You people are deprived of even a circle. You people want to thieve just to freeload your own sponsorship and even to feed your own friggin' mates every day, even if it means just yourself, because you're so poor for people and so poor for material and so poor for habit that you might have to have it. You will call it your day job, but you can't even fucking give it up if you know it's hurting someone. You might be told what has to happen, but whether or not you can stop touching it and stop fixing it and fashioning it to your own advantage is a completely different set of circumstances when we question your ability to wipe somebody's ass, let alone your own, only to go on and tell people you're the fashion police and then ask the person standing next to you to fight for you and not the person in front of you like the customer. What is it in Australia that people want the person standing alongside yourself to fight for you instead of the customer that you're pointing at and talking about? Like you want them to laugh, doesn't even fucking provide sense, doesn't even provide intelligence or justify interrogation. It's not even enough to say what, that's what you want to feed them? You don't even have it. Fancy without it where you would be found even amongst yourself. What? Clerical ties? No. Powerful ties? No. Powerful influence? Not so much. It might just be that you're not a fucking militant or defense or corporate power. You might just be influential and that's it. So the influence speaks for itself, where if you can't fight, it means you can't protect anyone. And if you've told someone to tell someone to tell someone, you can't fucking protect anyone. Fancy if it was just one person or one of anything and you've already went and fucking told everyone before shit started. Next minute you're carving your initials in a tree telling you love them or love something. That you just couldn't protect anyone. You couldn't fight even yourself. You couldn't fight to refrain or restrain yourselves. You had to tell someone to tell someone. You got no karma left, no fucking innocence the moment you tell someone your fucking karma is limited to the point you've told so many people you have no karma left. And if you have no karma, you have no strength. That's why omens are 1,000 times more powerful than karma. You could have burnt your karma before people have to shed light on what the fuck yous were doing with your mouth and your eyeballs and your distance and your time. And all the provisions consistently attributing through kleptomania and geriatrichood inside your system's file, your rank, your disposition, your very distancing mechanism, the one that doesn't even have English to save you when you've fucking said it all and done nothing, invested nothing. Your worth, your value, and your input that says you aren't even finished to date, you have no hypothesis strength, you're unsuccessful, you're not worth a retirement, and you still want somebody else to fucking do it for you so that you can get a good night's sleep, but you're a fucking day older. If that's not pedophilia, what does it take to understand families, shit parents that can't find the strength amongst them to process any one person or any one family for the greater good? And it's not because you had to square it up fair and square for the greater good in the world. Just the classic old fucking case of living in an evil, corrupt world and you not having a fucking problem with it, even when you're found doing it yourself. Unable to operate, unable to fix things or end it from your end. It's always somebody else. And in too many classic cases, whether heaven or earth, it's even worse in heaven. Take a look around the entire earth. You're absolutely shit, heaven or earth. It's always, oh, my dad's going to do it, my father, oh, my big brother, someone else. I'm sick of your shit. You could just take it like a folk story everywhere and we still have to be fucking subject to it. So, oh, my father, oh, my fuck, yeah, he's going to break his back and your mum's going to wipe your ass and your nana's going to make you a tea cake. Even though you need drugs and opium and tea and shit to calm your motherfucking nerves through criminal activity. As if like you're losing it. You might have done it for so long that you actually don't possess that part in your brain and possess that part in your personnel, possess that part in your business venture. Those crony businessman skills that filter itself into commonplace practice, commonplace humility. You pay people like shit, you pay them like pocket money per hour. And even if you paid someone you owed, you'd still expect something else out of it. You'd expect ongoing concern, trust issues, fuck tissues. And this was being stacked simultaneously in sequence through federal registrations and overseas dual citizenships to reflect international businesses in international markets. The culture inside the Australian corporate defence relationships, for example, once again, as one constantly on the hunt and growling prowl, the grooming prowl to infiltrate those numbers, like you're actually to pray for numbers. Any one number. I mean, talk about exposing yourselves. Strength exposes weakness. And if you can't simply protect anyone, you were found not being able to protect anyone of anything. If you went ahead and spoke why, it wouldn't matter why or why not. You are just weak and have weak signature strength. And you will expose your poverty and expose your weakness. You're just proving that you have nothing better and never could. Your family's shit. Your parents are shit. And you don't know anyone alongside the person in front of you to solve your fucking problems. You haven't got what it takes, so it's all about you. If it was a national thing when it came to outbreak of war in the world, last century before this one closed, it was native Australians doing it to you. Then it became friggin' India supposedly doing it to Australia. Then it was the Middle Earth Caliphate and fucking ISIS and Al-Qaeda doing it to you. Then it was India all over again doing it to you. Then it was goddamn Sudanese refugees doing it to you. Now it's goddamn supposedly the nation of China doing it to you. Do yous ever get off on a crutch charge? It just becomes the spin of the day, and you believe it. No one's deceiving you. You're doing it yourself. Your mouth that overrides your fucking eyeballs and pretend that it's actually your concern, when it might just be you haven't got what it takes, so it's all about you, and you don't even know what to stick with. You bloody help people rise out of their economic woes and then be found begrudged helping them, only to be the main contributor to aiding and abetting supposedly an enemy. And what is aiding and abetting? You take the word appetite and you deduct the crime, and you come up with aiding and abetting. That you actually do it. You don't have people on your side to end it right now, or to pay your personal debt for the greater good, to see that you can actually work. If you stole work and intellectual property amongst yourself, you'd be stupid all over it. Then you don't even replace it with work. That's why you stole work in the first place. You stole popularity. You stole occupation. You stole graphics, designs, expertise, ideas, innovation, scientific areas of science and literature, music, movies, bibliography, photographs. Again, popularity. You stole friends. You stole your goddamn mouth. You stole your conversation. Then in the midst of it all, you can't even be found making anything work, like that which just works. To make it work, whether or not work is actually something you can do, or you want somebody else to do it rather than the person in front of you. They could tell you straight up, just like a condition of fighting. Fighting is being able to keep things clean. Fighting is being able to struggle. Doing it for people when you got needs yourself, supposedly, but no, you want the person sitting next to you that you thieve their confidence from, rather than the person standing in front of you, the customer in front of you that you say is worth fighting or has to be fought. It just sounds like a classic extortion, classic credit fraud, identity fraud, exposing those enhanced uses of espionage as the interrogation feature, rather than the simple definition of perversions on citizens and breach of human rights inside homes or hospitals, those percentage gains bargaining numbers inside any jurisdiction or municipality. Of why defence ties to state asset grabs are exposed, and the frequent convening use of stolen intellectual property is an Australian way of life through media, through windows, window dressing, state asset grabs, incestuous peoples and their families, perceived by fellow corporate sponsors and private investors as an invitation. Now, talk about international crimes through defense resources, and legislation by annexure attachments to bypass policing law powers, indicating at any cost by a Confederate bond scheme, influencing these corporate standoff tactics as a way to reflect and ensure the nature of culpable activity unearthed from within these dragged out processes, that landscape development in these departmental sectors surrounding the landscape of strategic economic development plans in main certain council jurisdictions in Australia, state right, is really happening. It really, really is. It's your only way of life, the only reason you wake up every day. If you can't bring health and justice to one person, you're guilty of everyone. You're guilty of anyone, starting with your partner you sleep under a blanket with, starting with your family that you propose to others that you're strong, when you're actually found possessing slaves to compensate for your itinerant shortfalls in those proposed legislated, those legislation counters you use were actually being funded through state and government. You were subsidised by federal and state government grants in some marginal areas of all operations under blanket systems, investment as high as 73% of all the departments and agencies working inside any jurisdiction, pumping these fundamentalists, pumping these these citizens on the books of the government through the corporations, these practice managements through agencies, sometimes as high as 73% in some cities and some regions. Just like Brisbane, just like Ipswich and Logan, Southwest Burnett, the federal seat of Griffith, the Griffith University, mind you, the University of Griffith, the Denisons, and the federal seat of Blair, that you were funded and protected by defence and legislated through concessional grants when you were just a low-budget gimmick, poorly exercising an approved personal agenda that has no warranted authenticity other than to be found stealing it and criminally alleged to compensate for your itinerant shortfalls through credit fraud, through identity fraud. And Australia is the most credit-reliant people in the world. If Australia is the most credit-reliant people in the world, does that relate to intellectual property theft? Does that relate to financial theft? Does that relate to financial fraud? Does that relate to any fraud in the world? And if people are fraudulent, they're fucking fraud. And if they're fraudulent, they're corrupt. And when corruption sets in, it's permanent, and it becomes the overwhelming statistic, so that when people are even told it, even on a governing level, they don't believe it because they're too busy trying to tap dance around it or shy from the consequence. It never makes the news. They say cut like a scab, knowing full well that they're wounded. And what is it to be wounded? People living a fraudulent fucking life in existence? You say anybody can hurt people, but only when you can heal are you truly great. Just like yourself. Fancy needing people 24/7, not paying them, and thieving from them every step of the way also. Through practice managements that pretend that you're a scientist, pretends that you're a telecommunication, pretends that you knew anything about biology whatsoever, only to be found unable to compensate for sure-shot diagnoses that still 5 years later is found reparating and servicing no outcome, that yous are shit at what you do, and you're shit people that have not finished. You are unsuccessful. Yous aren't fit for retirement. You are fit for a jail cell. You are fit to face the court. You are fit to face the whole world in front of 1 million witnesses in any classic case scenario, where those wage subsidies meant isolated incidents of after-hours espionage, rape and extortion on sovereign citizens was happening, and that detrimental effect of protecting the undergraduate class yearbook of certain defence service personnel exempting themselves or found exempt from the record or inquest was always forever happening, because you just need a way to sort of freeload your offset. You need to freeload an offset You're freeloading sponsorship people frequenting a non-for-profit charity organization even when it comes to individuals with no dependents. Just to find freeholding stock share or just anything for free. I put it to you once again that if you haven't got anything for free tomorrow, for me or for anyone as a collective group, then you are poorer than anyone on earth that doesn't have a dollar to their name. Because you have nothing for free. And your family and group is worth nothing. Your network and company is worth absolutely nothing. You have nothing to cry about, and you have no need for people to defend you or fight and sacrifice their time, energy, resources, manpower, intelligence, governing, protection, or productivity ever again.
If you don't have a copy, please request it. And all of our literature is free. But these three nations are all involved in a war against terror, and they have all kinds of problems, crises in their nations. And in all of them, it revolves around drugs and race and weather and pornography and upside down families and crime and just about every pathology you can imagine. We are afflicted by it. And what does that all mean? And what does that have to do with the physical house? Well, this is a world crisis, and God is just getting started and shaking all nations. You can see about the use of chemicals, chemical warfare in Syria, where people are being killed. Maybe 1,000 people were just recently killed, and that they're in that incendiary Middle East. And it's about to explode all around the little nation called Israel. Egypt is in a civil war, and that's a major threat to the little nation of Israel, and Germany is moving into the Middle East quietly. Germany and the European Union is moving in and filling the vacuum that has been left by a very weak America. And that is causing all of these problems to multiply. And we're now seeing that Russia and China are in a kind of a Cold War mode, like they were in the past against America and Britain and the Jewish nation in the Middle East. So God is shaking the nations. And imagine, and what is so shocking about this, that it all revolves around a physical building from which there is a major message of great importance emanating from that building. The solution to this world crisis revolves around that building of all things. Now that's Bible prophecy. This is just phenomenal when you think about it. How could God get so detailed and even minute in explaining all of this to us? Is that the way you understand Bible prophecy?
Does that relate to intellectual property theft? Does that relate to financial theft? Does that relate to financial fraud? Does that relate to any fraud in the world? And if people are fraudulent, they're fucking fraud. And if they're fraudulent, they're corrupt. And when corruption sets in, it's permanent, and it becomes the overwhelming statistic, so that when people are even told it, even on a governing level, they don't believe it because they're too busy trying to tap dance around it or shy from the consequence. It never makes the news. They say cut like a scab, knowing full well that they're wounded. And what is it to be wounded? People living a fraudulent fucking life in existence? You say anybody can hurt people, but only when you can heal are you truly great. Just like yourself. Fancy needing people 24/7, not paying them, and thieving from them every step of the way also. Through practice managements that pretend that you're a scientist, pretends that you're a telecommunication, pretends that you knew anything about biology, whatsoever, only to be found unable to compensate for sure-shot diagnoses that still 5 years later is found reparating and servicing no outcome, that you are shit at what you do and you're shit people that have not finished. You are unsuccessful. You aren't fit for retirement. You are fit for a jail cell. You are fit to face the court. You are fit to face the whole world in front of 1 million witnesses. In any classic case scenario, where those wage subsidies meant isolated incidents of after-hours espionage, rape and extortion on sovereign citizens was happening, and that detrimental effect of protecting the undergraduate class yearbook of certain defence service personnel exempting themselves or found exempt from the record or inquest was always forever happening, because you just need a way to sort of freeload your offset. You need to freeload an offset. You're freeloading sponsorship people frequenting a non-for-profit charity organisation, even when it comes to individuals with no dependents. Just to find freeholding stock share or just anything for free, I put it to you once again, that if you haven't got anything for free tomorrow, for me or for anyone as a collective group, then you are poorer than anyone on earth that doesn't have a dollar to their name. Because you have nothing for free, and your family and group is worth nothing. Your network and company is worth absolutely nothing. You have nothing to cry about, and you have no need for people to defend you or fight and sacrifice their time, energy, resources, manpower, intelligence, governing, protection, or productivity ever again. You are worth nothing, absolutely nothing. And you are not worth investing in one more day. You need to pay debts, because debt and deficit is not bed and breakfast. If you think you're a militant or exempt from those fucking breaches, think again. You are not militant, you are just purely influential or merely influential. Because if you're not paying debts or helping anyone, you're not a fucking militant, you're just an influence, and a poor driven one, trying to compensate for your itinerant shortfalls and your private conductivity, that wants to see marginal seat funding in areas previously mentioned as an industrial grade market share intellectual property theft campaign, being pre-approved by fundamentalist practice management schemes through confederacies inside state and church, the epitome of state-sponsored corruption. Incest becomes mind-staggeringly obvious, because it's the incestuous nature of people that find shit families like yours and shit influence like yours still fail to reparate and solve processes and close breaches on individuals of any concern whatsoever as we speak. So if you were given all the provisions in the world to end it tomorrow, we'll see how you go, because we'll talk about the heightened risk. You will mention it yourself from your end, but that's what it is to throw it back at your feet and expose yourselves that you're an inherent risk and nobody need defend yous or waste any more time or life on yous. I mean, hey, what are you going to tell people amongst your own rank, amongst your own file and disposition? What? That anything else is a waste of your time and a waste of your life? You'll just be asking the people standing alongside you to fight for you rather than the customer in front of you. And if that's what cowards are, that's an Australian. That's typical Australians. You want to fucking play tag and tiggy just like you want people to fucking forcibly mind read for you, like Q&A. And get off on a crutch charge and forget or ever deny that it was all physics and chemistry, just like social chemistry, when you're the worst socio-economy on earth. And what is the worst socio-economy on earth equal to? It's equal to the poorest people on the planet. A 6-letter word that starts with the letter P, where you're an expert in 4-letter words, and 4-letter words mean nothing to you. Are people that can't be trusted in so many areas, that you're a womanizer and an expert on pulling sharps on people. So therefore you become somewhat of a fucking coward, wanting the person standing next to you to fight for you rather than the customer in front of you. You're walking, talking shampoo bottles needing security. And they don't give a shit working for you because they need a fucking job too. So therefore it becomes minimalised, becomes marginalised and subsidised. That you need approval just like a practice licence. And it might just be that you're a low budget gimmick the whole time and you can't even afford bums on seats. You want to make TV out of reality. And you want to turn episodes to bloody events. And you want anyone to defend your funkin' ass, even though fuck you, the funky can't take it. Those enhanced dependencies of non-for-profit economic cover defense strategies by Confederate bond schemers inside the national intelligence agencies of a nation, found in a cultural dependency. Those cultural interrogation tactics that gather the exercise cover and do not, in fact, offer cover. They just schemists. They need a pedestrian for cover as much as they need a dead set assurance, even if it means they're forever suicidal and they don't need people to know that in the meantime. You'll just see the results of the wounds of their fucking trail and destruction everywhere they're found stupid over their percentages and those people inside homes and inside society. They're stupid over it. Only to tell people they're the fashion police. They've never changed an ass once. And they want everybody to fucking forget the fact that they are distracting themselves from the customer in front of them by telling anybody but themselves to defend them and to concentrate. It's what we call these concentration camps. And those fucking cheeky, stingy, impoverished Nazi niggers. World War II Nazis were called niggers in English because nigger is a Germanic word. And Nazis were considered niggers. So if you're not a nigger, you don't have to be a nigger. You're better than a nigger, don't be a nigger. If you're not a Nazi, don't be a fucking Nazi, be better than a Nazi. When the Nazis graduate, they call themselves Aussies, because when they say nah, Aussie says oh, nah, oh. Yeah, the lifestyle exceeding income and income exceeding lifestyle factor that sees someone else fight their fucking battles rather than the customer in front of them, whether it's them or anybody else. That's right. Niggers. Can't be afraid to say it like any N-word. The fucking bad N-word is the Nazi because Nazis were called niggers and that was World War II talk. Fancy finding people so bloody blatantly disregarding public safety that they got the hide to use a black man for defense and have a black man defend your fucking ass and fight your battles even in word and scripture rather than the customer in front of you having to make sense of yous. It's like every fortnight or every bloody 364 days of your life. Anybody to use a fucking nigger, anybody to use a fucking scab. But the day they're paid or it comes to an inaugural commemoration or something, or some holiday, it's like, hey, my ninja, they're a ninja that day. Not a nigger anymore, not a Nazi, they're a fucking ninja. As I've been told, and it makes perfect sense. If we're made all equal, when it means the whole world has to be combined for world peace, it doesn't mean standing over 300 national types and just throwing all times of offense at them in one language. Sort of like doing it to yourself, fingering your own bums in private, just like you do with the photo camera. Got nothing to aim a camera at, and if it means look stupid or look conveniently, occupied to utilize cameras and videography, you just be found fingering your ass, just like the way you dump your trolleys, only to fuck off in something else. No more to pay. You're depraved of anything to talk about and aim at. There is no defense strategy whatsoever. It would not be seen as strategic or circumstantial. It would just be evident, therefore it's presidential, just like presiding member family ties to all tax-keeping records of warranted Australian citizenship numbers conscripted in any industrial sector where practice management licenses were the nature of approval and the nature of service upkeep and service maintenance. Cohorts enlisted in such network protectionism and liabilities to pardon these transactional records for residential tax purposes that Australia, like very few countries, might as well be culprits, and for as many missing children or missing people around the world as you can throw the book at them for. Just like intellectual property theft. If you're a state of Queensland, let alone the nation of Australia, and you were a full-blown crack addict with $100 billion in debt and climbing here in 2020 under COVID-19 activity, then you have the ability to rip off the freaking world in the next 10 years to $5 trillion. If you're a nation of Australia with over $700 billion worth of debt and you're a full-blown crack addict and an intellectual property thief, you have the capacity to rip the whole world around us off to the tune of $5 trillion in the next 10 years or $10 trillion. You have the capacity and you have the trend. It all starts with the way you treat yourself and what your largest civil liability compensation suits payouts look like when we ask to pull your transactional accounts without having to hinder or hinge upon class action magnitude or where people get anything or what it is to say. What is your largest civil liabilities compensation suit payout in the history of Australia? Last time I checked, it was $1.2 lousy million in the state of Victoria, beating the previous record in the state of Queensland, which was set at 1.1 million lousy dollars in all of your history. Is it because you're the most poorest compensators of all crime in the world that your crime is like menued and bracketed so that it makes crime affordable, knowing full well that you shouldn't? That's why you're a Christian. But when you do, it's the one thing that sets you off after hours, let alone day in, week out, month in, year out? I think so. Any crime in the world that says you can't afford it, you might as well have done it. So if that's anything to do with what you call settlement or even journeyman, if it was journeyman, why don't you go back to where you came from? And if it was settlement, why haven't you? I put it to you that just like a language, you don't know how to. And that's why everybody needs sympathy for you. While you splutter it, other countries have to suffer sanction, just like cunts have to suffer sanction. And cunt is a fucking social order too high for most people to reach. Just like the cunt of a job, or perfect English terminology that says cunt of a job, in opposed to mob of wankers, because wankers work in mobs. They don't feel comfortable unless they're wanking each other. And wanking through conversation, they need one of anything to wank, and they don't feel comfortable unless they're wanking or sucking on a bong or something to throw around like a football. They're called wankers. They need something to wank each other. They don't feel comfortable without a ball, without a bong, without a conversation point, without commentary, without a round table wank. They need to wank.
It will produce greater works than...
They're asking the person next to them to fight for them rather than the customer in front of them.
We're not talking about wisdom like that. We're not talking
Universal depravity demanding universal destruction says like the demands, like the depravity, therefore like the destruction, you're just doing it to yourselves. And that no one's deceiving you, you're deceiving yourself because you don't know anyone. You just have no goddamn front. Stars are legends, stars are front, so you're found doing it to yourselves. Poof to women and sister boys falling victim to clairvoyancies. And desperate to keep yourself exempt from the record, even like putting your shit suit button together when you walk out of a court, only to be found some fucking stupid ugly broad on Ellenborough Street in Ipswich, fucking off to Melbourne with your 37 Shatuzi, or whatever the fuck it is, Shantuzi, the way you do. Yeah, clutching your stomach as hard as a stone. Yeah. Can't get blood out of a stone. Isn't that amazing? The old proverb that speaks for itself. What's that? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, but not in your world. Right? Because you're just a storytelling thief and the only people that live in storyland. If you had any power, your problems would be solved by now. You'd have nothing to speak about, but let me guess, life to you is just a novelty and not a negotiation, because you can't wage or negotiate any area of expertise unless first somebody taught you, because autism requires being special kids with special learning difficulties that require a 24/7 care and support staff around you to give you approval to do anything, even pay a debt, even through petty cash, even through any internal structure. You need a 24/7 care support staff to give you approval for anything, because you're special kids, you're special attention seekers. You desperately have to end your life as editing heroes, right, with all those teetering factors that filter itself into commonplace humility and commonplace practice that you're so short of. I mean, seriously, it's an itinerant shortfall beyond giving you licensed approval in the first place to operate, down to only be low-budget gimmicks surviving on double-dipping and triple-dipping departmental protection and concession for the taxpayer and any account found in the industrialised world. Thieving your industry, thieving your graphics, thieving your material, for God's sakes. You were thieving your popularity from the beginning, and then thieving your occupation, only to be found every day of your life in those circles like mobs or wankers, thieving your conversation. No.
Will you still love me tomorrow? Architect. Will you still love me tomorrow? Holocaust. There was a young lady, my wife, who disrespected. The first day I met her, she had a ribbon around her neck, and she wore that ribbon for years and hit a flute. When I'd ask her to remove it, she'd always have excuse. One stormy night while we were in bed, I snatched the ribbon off and off rolled her head. I laughed myself to sleep, the room spun around like a record. In the backseat of the pistols, you turn to superhuman tissues. My brain is a computer which launched nuclear missiles. They split you in the halves, blood baths, the first and last. When I walk into the room for the draft, I'm cursed and mad. Hurt your staff with a verse from the past. I'm kill grade. Wander cornfields at midnight and drill pain. Still slaves in this drunken parade. Blunts in the rain, realizing I got nothing but chains. Dump in your frame over waterfalls. You spin on your side like Neptune. Gun you down in restrooms. MCs catch flesh wounds on the earlobes. Sit my beard's cold, sometimes appear old. Carrying 7 scrolls, peg-legged and musketeer robes. And fear shows. Dirty black pirate, the rap tyrant. Scientist, psychiatrist, drinking attack clients. Track violence when I step to the mic. Weapon of light, Holocaust. You regretting your life, step in the fight. With the humble young merchant, 80 minds in one person. They hop in and out time to time, that's why I'm cursing. Who the f***? Jump punks, catch lumps and slump buck. Dumbstruck, bench press, dump trust with one thrust. Run just because you get the stage. The kerosene that ignites on.
God says it's so bad, you can go ahead and read in Ezekiel 24, that it's so bad that he not only burns what's in the pot, he burns the pot. I mean, this is extreme wrath from God. If we have an ounce of fear toward God, we ought to heed what this says. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm trying to show you this is going to be the most wonderful and marvelous ending that you could imagine, but there is going to be some rough times in between getting to that end.
As we will be bringing you up-to-the-minute information.